Hello out there. I wanted to talk to you today just a little bit about a process that's helped me figure out what kind of writer I want to be. So, the way I'm describing it is figuring out how to read like a writer. Now, this is something that I often teach my students to do. So, I'm actually a college professor full time, and I teach a lot of journalism classes and media criticism type classes. And one of the things I'm always telling my students with journalistic nonfiction writing is you have to read a lot of really good stuff in order to be a stronger writer. And so, this had always applied to that type of writing in my life. But as I was figuring out how I wanted to do creative writing, which for me has been wholly self-taught, I've never taken a creative writing class. I had to kind of figure out that process for myself. And all of a sudden, it sort of occurred to me, okay, Jessica, you can apply that same principle to your creative writing. And so the first book, I don't have it with me because I used to own it and I've passed it off along to other romance readers in my life since. But the first book that I ever did this with was Tessa Dare's A Week to Be Wicked. So this was one of the first historicals that I just really loved. And there was something about the way that she wrote that book that just kept making my stomach swoop. So if you're a romance reader, you know that swoop. The swoop is probably why you read romance in the first place, and maybe it's why you want to start writing romance or you enjoy writing romance. So I decided to get kind of academic about reading that book. So I had read it straight through, and I loved it, and it gripped me and it moved me, and I thought it was romantic and hot, and I just liked what it was doing. And so I started to think, okay, let's break this down. So I literally, would open up A Week to Be Wicked, and I would have a piece of paper or a notebook next to me, and I would just kind of outline, make notes about like what's happening in this chapter. What is it about their dynamic that I'm finding so delicious? Like, what is it about his personality? What is it about the portrayal of who she is and what her hopes are, and how does that relationship grow over time? So it was one of those things that for me, I think especially helped me figure out how to write the men that I like to read, and to think about how to kind of slowly reveal, kind of like their softer side or their sweeter side, and how to kind of find that balance between making a hero character aloof, or kind of sarcastic, or maybe a little bit smart alecky, but still kind of have a tenderness to him. So that was one of those moments for me that really just sort of opened my eyes to how I could better learn from some of the really talented writers that have put all these books out. So as I was thinking about this particular project for this summer, there's one book that I've always wanted to kind of do this with, because it's a book that was wildly popular, and it's very different than the kind of books that I write, and I thought it would be kind of a fun challenge to take some of those dynamics and introduce them into my own work. So I do have a copy of this book. If you are a romance reader, if you read contemporaries, it's very likely that you have read The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. It sort of took the world over by storm, and it came out in 2016, and it hit all of the bestseller lists and all of the best romances of that year type of lists. So it's pretty well known. If you go onto romance writing groups online and you're like, what's your favorite romance of all time? A lot of people will put The Hating Game on there. So that being said, it's a really different style than what I usually write. So I got to thinking it would be kind of a fun creative challenge to try to study The Hating Game a little bit, like I had long ago done with A Week to Be Wicked, and to think about, what can I learn from how Sally Thorne is presenting these characters? What can I learn from her writing style? What can I learn from, her character development, from her sense of setting, all those sorts of things. So, this is the process that I'm honestly still going through. The number one thing that I wanted to try with The Hating Game as an inspiration was trying to write a book, one that had some kind of workplace type setting. Frankly, because those books are just quite popular, and I spend lots of time in various workplaces, and so I have a lot of context that I can bring into that with my own life experience. But the other thing that is unique to me, if I think about like what I want to try to replicate with the Hating Game, is that it is written in first person, and it's only written from the woman's point of view. So that's really different for me. I typically write in third person, and I typically write alternating viewpoints. So one chapter comes from his perspective, one chapter comes from her perspective, and it kind of goes back and forth throughout the entire book. So, but one of the things, I think one of the reasons that this book like just works in terms of developing the tension. I mean, obviously there's like, it's an enemies to lovers book. So if you're not familiar with that trope, it's pretty self-explanatory. And it's also called The Hating Game. So she hints at that with the title. But the whole story, we're basically in Lucy's head. So we get her every weird thought, her obsession with him, whether it's out of hate or out of lust as the book goes on. But he remains kind of a mystery to us. We only know him through Lucy's eyes. And so that continues to have this air of mystery. Like, he unfolds much more slowly in this book. And that's something that I wanted to play with. So I decided for the book that I'm going to work on this summer, which the working title is loosely called The Fund Feud. Again, I'm thinking about like titles. Like, I typically don't do that kind of short, punchy title, but I'm like, that feels kind of in line with a different style of book. So for the book that I'm writing, that's what I'm trying to do. The whole story is going to be told through my main character's eyes. Her name's Elizabeth, at least for now. All these details could change. But we are only going to meet the hero of my book, Colin, through what Elizabeth tells us, shows us what she feels. So one of the things, I'm going to write more about this on my website, but, just to kind of give you an example, I will actually take notes as I'm reading a book. So these aren't very pretty, but I'm thinking about, again, those like stomach swoop moments. Like, what are those moments that it's just like, oh, I like what the author did there. I like that little bit of tension. I like this dynamic. And so, as I'm thinking about how to learn from a book like Sally Thorne's book here, I'm not thinking, I'm going to set an office-based romance in a publishing company. I'm not thinking my heroine is going to be from a family who owns a strawberry farm, and my hero is going to kind of have this complicated backstory with his parents and with his brother. That's not the level of detail. I'm not trying to copy this story. I'm trying to learn from the dynamics. So a couple of the things that I really like about what Sally does here in The Hating Game is, I think that she plays with that idea that like hate and love can be very closely linked, or like frustration can turn to lust, and like passion and anger, like, that there's actually sometimes not a lot of difference between the ways that those emotions present themselves. And that sometimes when we think we're having one set of feelings about someone, we actually might be having a different set of feelings. So that, for instance, is one of the things that I think would be fun to play with in my own book. Thinking about her use of dialogue. So this is one thing I wanted to show you. So I actually, one of the things I'm struggling with, or just trying to think through as I start this new book, is if we don't have chapters from his perspective, when do we hear from him, and how often do we hear from him? So I don't know if this is going to show up, but, so here's the book. You can kind of flip through, and I decided I wanted to highlight any time that the main hero, Josh, talks. So you're going to see, we're going to get all the way up to page 7 before we get any kind of dialogue that comes from him. So up until this point, we are only hearing from Lucy thinking about Lucy's thoughts, and as you go on, I don't want to give too much of the book away, it might be, it's like just like a line a page. I mean, this picks up as the book goes on. Obviously, as she gets to know him better and the dynamics of their relationship change, but that was one of those things for me where I was like, aha, that is going to be different for me in terms of the pace at which we get to know that hero character if everything is coming first person. So these are some of the things I'm thinking about. How do they get to know each other? How do we misunderstand the hero character when we're not seeing things from his perspective? How might his behaviors be taken out of context? Or how might quietness or seeming indifference, how might that actually be disguising some other kind of dynamic that could be going on? So I'm going to wrap this up here, but this is just one of those examples, and as I go on with this process, I think I'll continue to do some of these, book features. I like to think about, how can so I read through a book, I enjoy it as a reader, and then I put on my writer's cap and I say, okay, what was it about the way this chapter was structured? What was it about the use of humor or dialogue, the description? What was it about the use of, the slow burn, or, how it was that the physical tension like amped up? So it's a practice that's worked well for me. I encourage you to think about it. And if you've had any similar experience, if there's a book that you read and were able to learn from as a writer, I would love to hear your experiences.